Jessica Crow. I'm the founder of Apogee and the host of Change Leader Insights. And I am really excited. Today, I have here with me Renelle Everett Darr. She is the founder of Insight Coaching and Consulting and the host of Conscious Insights Strategies for Leadership Evolution. It's a podcast and video series. Renelle, thank you so much for being here. I actually found her on LinkedIn. She talks a lot about conscious leadership and her commitment to activating evolved workplaces that nurture and fuel human potential and organizational growth. And that's right in line with the conversations that we're having here on the Change Leader Insights podcast. So, Renelle, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and how you got to where you are? And then we'll talk about conscious leadership and some of the things that leaders should be thinking about as they're implementing strategy and developing themselves as leaders of people and projects and change.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It's so good to be here. And I love that we are both like the word insights. So we have
Yeah.
insights
Yeah.
in a lot of the names of things. So there's just it's such a powerful word. So a little bit about my background. Let's see. I started my career in the big consulting firms, and I
Mhm.
actually started my career in finance and accounting. And it's funny, people that know me often laughed out loud when they hear that, and not because of the thing itself, but just because of just my general personality. But for me,
Yeah.
it was great to experience. That's the language of business. I wanted to understand that side of things, and I think I maybe unconsciously knew that I would get back to the other side so that I could be a holistic business person.
Yeah.
And
That
so
makes sense.
I started there. I wasn't in accounting very long. I transferred into consulting pretty quickly, and I worked for EY and Deloitte, and
Hmm.
I got to do just a broad range of work in telecom, IT, strategy, et cetera. And for anyone that has ever worked or heard of these firms, you come out at age 22 and you're immediately working with executives. And
Yeah.
sometimes you might just be making copies for something, but you're immediately in these organizations with executives. So it's quite the initiation into the business world. And as I grew up in that world, I saw so much of what the breadth of business. And then I went to United Way. So I took what would seem like a total shift, but I had done a lot of work at United Way with
Hmm.
the firms as a volunteer. And there is probably when some of my biggest change work started. So in the state of
Yeah.
Colorado, 20 plus years ago, we implemented um, 211, Colorado 211, and Health and Human Services number. And that was one of the biggest change
Wow.
things I really still think about it. And I didn't have the kind of training or knowledge or wisdom that I have now. And so that was also the school of hard knocks. And so that really got me, kept me in that area. And then I went back to a smaller consulting firm and concentrated mostly on change and strategy. And it was there in these large scale change projects that we were doing that, well, one, I was developing as a young leader. And so I had an executive coach. And I was also
So helpful.
so helpful. So
Yeah.
and I would kept seeing like the biggest issues we were having were not necessarily always the process and the technology. It was in the leadership and in the people.
Hmm.
And so I just wondered, like, why isn't coaching part of change management? And so
Hmm.
therein began that journey for me. And I started Insight about 15 years ago and have taken, done coaching separately, change separately, strategy separately, and then weave them all together.
Oh, I love that. That makes a lot of sense to me. So I think where you're at now is a place that I'm excited to share with everybody today. You talk about on, the content that you're putting out there, the information you're sharing is you talk a lot about conscious leadership. What does that mean to you? And how do you explain that to the people that you're supporting?
Yeah, but I'll tell you what it means to me, and I will tell you that most people are experiencing it versus having it
Hmm.
explained to them. And I think that right
Yeah.
tells you something about conscious leadership because it is a shift from being fully in our heads, being reactive, being triggered, which is what our world somewhat
Hmm.
asks of us, to really leading with our whole self, meaning also our body. And so when I talk about when we're doing conscious leadership work, it's largely based in where our gifts come from, and but also that's where our reactive tendencies come from.
Mm-hmm.
That's where our triggers come from. So the same place our gifts come from are the same place a lot of our triggers come from, and
Mm-hmm.
how we've learned to keep ourselves safe. And
Mm-hmm.
that shows up in leadership.
Right.
And it
It
shows
does.
up, and all the stories and all the beliefs that we grew up with shows up in leadership. And so we do this deep work within the workplace so that we can actually tie, wow, these things that I'm doing at work and these systemic things that are happening are tied to a lot of the beliefs and worldview that I grew up with and I still have. And so the shift into from reactive to what we call creative,
Mm,
that is what we're doing when we talk about conscious leadership. And when we shift to conscious leadership, we are letting go and examining some of these things, but we're also walking towards the tension of like what keeps me safe and what brings me purpose. And
yeah.
what comes out of that with a lot of deep work is we're able to hold multiple perspectives. We
Yep.
shift from seeing things as problems to saying, oh, what's the outcome I'm seeking? We
Mm-hmm.
start to see the world from, we're programmed by society, and then we start to shift from the inside out. When we start to share power, it's called like power with versus
Yeah.
power away or power over. And so the way that we lead when we start to do that deeper work has such implications on everything, and
Mm-hmm.
specifically people always ask, well, why did this deep work? Yes, it's good for you, it's good for wholeness, but it's really good for business also.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you were describing that too, and we had a chance to talk before this podcast. I was so excited about the fact that you're doing this deep work, this healing work with leaders, and the impact it's not only having on them, but the outcomes of the organization, because that correlation, how they show up, has a direct impact on the people they're supporting, they're responsible for leading, and then they're the ones that are executing change. I would imagine, though, being confronted with that deep work, that's hard. That's a really vulnerable place for leaders to be, especially leaders who have seen success with maybe the ways that they have been leading in the past. And now what you're inviting is a very different way of thinking and behaving. And, when you encounter that, when you bump into the leaders who have that resistance to even doing the deep work and healing, how do you handle that? How do you help them see that connection between doing that deep work, the impact it'll have on their teams, and the organization's performance?
Well, I will tell you that we try to take a look at what we call the reactive behaviors as
Mm-hmm.
limiting behaviors and really, really honor what got people where they're at.
Yeah.
And we really honor that, yeah, this is what got you here. And most high achieving people want, like, they are open to like, but this got me here, and it's limiting, right? It got you.
Mm-hmm.
What could get you even further if you let go of that?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much dragging people down, because of the energetics
Yeah.
so it's about how we frame it. And I will tell you though. There are, leaders that might not totally understand this, but they know that there's something greater. And those are the ones
Mm-hmm.
that they might resist it a little bit, but they know that there's something greater. And I think that's why we have such a beautiful combination of one-on-one work and
Mm-hmm.
group, where some of this deeper work we're not going to do first in a big group.
Right.
We're first going to
Right.
spend some time really understanding that part of ourselves, and connecting it to business results is really important. It's one thing,
Yeah.
and I think therapy is great. I'm not saying that, but it's one thing to go separately get this therapy and then come back to work and then try to tie that all together.
Yeah.
Another thing, let's say you're getting therapy, you're having deep leadership coaching, and you're tying it to business results, and then you can see how it all fits together. And that can help
Yeah.
overcoming resistance as well.
Yeah. And yeah. And I would imagine too, if there are others who are on your team or in your peer group that are a part of that experience, that'll be even more, that'll accelerate that process of delivering results potentially even faster than if you were trying to go it alone, so to speak. You've had, so you shared your background bio and how you got to where you are. Did you have a moment, like a transformation moment, where you're like, this is you felt enlightened all of a sudden, or has it just been a gradual evolution for you, and each year you kind of learn more and evolve more? How does it work?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, gosh, I guess I think if anyone claims enlightened, they're probably not enlightened. So I'm never going to claim that, and then maybe that means I am. No, just kidding. I would say it's many people will describe it as a spiral journey where we
Yeah.
are spiral. It kind of we it's like a spiral rather than straight up, and it's like I feel it like it's a real expansive journey. I
Hmm.
do think there are major moments along the way that we look back to and say, wow, that was a major turning point for me.
Mm.
Some of them are things that are really hard things that have happened in our life, and other times it's a moment of
Yeah.
inspiration or of understanding. And so if I think back on my life, I think one of one of the first big kind of moments of transformation was when I took that leap from Deloitte into nonprofit. That felt
Right.
like a really big, scary thing for me as a young professional. And but there was this pull of purpose, right? I mean,
Hmm.
I didn't pay as much, et cetera. There was this pull of purpose and safety, and and so that was one of the first big leaps for me.
Yeah.
And then I think if I think the next big leap would have been when I mentioned that I hadn't the first executive coach. I
Yeah.
I was, leading big projects. I was a young leader, pretty smart, but pushing pretty hard.
Hmm.
And I don't think I truly understood what was really running the show was this
Mm.
perfectionism and what that meant. And so that was a huge leap in my consciousness and how I showed up and how I felt. Like I felt so different. And so
Yeah.
then, that led me to starting Insight, which was a pretty big deal to leave the confines of the work, the paycheck and start
Right.
your own thing, as you know. And so, and those were all before, I mean, I wasn't technically doing, I wouldn't call it conscious leadership or conscious expansion back then. And yet, yeah, that's what I was doing is
Exactly.
I was
Yeah.
having conscious expansions. And then when I got into this work and started doing the leadership circle is a main consciousness tool that I use. And I
Yeah.
started working on that in 2010. And that's when I started also getting really deep into my consciousness work. And I've had
Mm.
a lot of jumps along the way. And one of my favorite moments is when I finally figured out and discovered and had clients where we could combine this all together. It wasn't just
Yeah.
coaching and just strategy or just change. It was like, let me show you, let's work together of how your work as a leader shifts the system.
Yeah, wow. Okay, that's so great. Can I ask a question? You talked about, just to help people who are listening, if they're wondering, maybe is now the time that I should get coaching, or, connect with you and your team to better understand themselves and how their organizations can improve. You mentioned perfectionism as something that you were focused on pre kind of that consciousness awakening that you had. How does that impact people? How does perfectionism, or when we aren't self-aware in the workplace, what kind of impact can that have on our teams, on the organization's ability to innovate? I mean, what have you seen, what have you experienced, so those who are listening can maybe hear that and think, oh, hey, that's something that I'm doing today,
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, a lot of high achievers, a lot of leaders have this controlling part or this perfectionist or this pusher in them.
Hmm.
And it's served them well for a really long time. What's happening though is it's absolutely exhausting.
Hmm.
So when we're pushing ourselves so hard to be better, to get better results, and it's, maybe tied to like, I don't fully feel good enough. Then guess
Right.
what? We're doing that to everyone else. And people, we think we're just pushing ourselves, but really we're pushing everyone else, and everyone else can feel that energy as well.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it they
Mm-hmm.
might like because we're getting things done and we're successful, and part of it is just exhausting. And I
Stressful. Yeah.
that's exactly where I was doing, is that my bosses, they could kind of see it, but the results I was getting was pretty great. The people I was working with, it was hard on them because
Yeah.
they liked me generally as a human, but they didn't love me when I was under that kind of stress and acting that way.
Yeah. And that's hard, as a leader of someone who is driving like that, getting those results, but maybe creating a stress. And not to say that it was you were creating any sort of toxicity, but it's hard to disconnect the two, and so it takes someone who's self-aware like you, or a leader who understands what they're seeing, to say, hey, I'm seeing this in you. Let's put you through this process of coaching, or let's talk about how we can approach things in a different way, so you're still getting the results but not having the impact on yourself and others that maybe you were having without that awareness and support. I'm a huge fan of combining coaching and change management and strategy, and the coaching piece in particular, because it's such a wonderful way to discover your own, you come to your own conclusions, but you need that support and accountability. But not everyone has access to a coach. How, if I'm a manager or a leader in an organization, and my team or myself, we don't have coaching, what are some strategies that you could recommend to people who are in that situation, to be, to help them go through that process of self-awareness that they could do independently without a coach?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an interesting question because sometimes it floors me that more organizations don't have this available for people,
Totally agree.
because it has such an impact on the business, right? And that's
Yeah.
usually the reason that they don't have it, is that they don't think they have the budget and the time for it.
Yep.
And so I would first say, is like, try to get that in your organization, whatever
Yeah.
because I think it's the right thing to do for people. And if, I mean, and sometimes the grassroots approach of, we need this and we want this, is the way to
Mm-hmm.
go. And it doesn't have to be an individual coach. I do, cohorts,
Yeah,
where
that's
there's a
powerful
little bit
too.
of individual coaching, but there's stuff done in group as well. And so you
Mm-hmm.
have this combo. And to your point, if you absolutely can't get that support at all, I think place where, I mean, I would start with values, like getting really
Yeah.
clear on what you value, and getting really clear on what triggers you, and getting really clear on, like, I ask people when we're doing certain debriefs to tell me their life story in 3
Mm-hmm.
chapters.
Mm.
And write down your life story and start looking at, what is my worldview? What happened to me? What influences the way I see things? How has that helped me? How might it be limiting to me? What are
Mm.
my values? And oh, are these impacting my values? And I mean, I think that's a place to start. I think reading books on emotional intelligence
Mm-hmm.
are
Yep.
really helpful. And I mean, there are courses, there are a lot of self-improvement courses out there. There is, so there's a way to do this. I think what gets in the way is, I've read a lot of great books. I love reading
Right.
books. Love them, love them. There's something about reading a book and then applying and embodying
Mm-hmm.
things. So it's whatever you can do to get some practice in place, because
Right.
it's not just about a behavior shift of, let me just go act differently. It's like, ooh, I've got to change something within me about my belief system. I've got to bring some unconscious to the surface, and then I've got to like play and experiment with it. And
Yeah.
so whatever it is, whatever you do, first, don't just try to change a behavior. Think of things as an experiment, and
Yeah.
do more than what you read. Like, you've got to do something with it to that.
Yeah.
That's how we really start to embody this shift.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful for those who cannot invest or don't feel like they have the means. But I agree with you. I would love to see organizations really invest in coaching, not just their executives, but their middle managers as well, who there's a real, inability, I think, or a lot of people go into management roles without that training or awareness, and it's school of hard knocks, which is fine. And how much more potent and thriving could organizations be if they had that focus and support of coaching and developing earlier in the process too. So I would love to, I'd love to wave the magic wand and see more organizations invest
Yeah.
coaching for their leaders and individuals who work there. Now, in your experience, having worked with clients for over 15 years, what sort of, obviously this is something that supports growth, innovation, organizational change, success. But do you have any examples of companies that have done, have gone through your process and have, like, how did it change anecdotally? How did it change their performance? How did it change, what ripples were sent throughout the organization as a result of investing in this capability that you were helping the leaders develop?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, great question, right? We want to see some results of this. So I have a couple of several different organizations where I've had the opportunity to do many of these pieces.
Yeah.
One in particular, we started doing some work with the executive team,
Mm-hmm.
and then I would do some deeper work with the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really started with emotional intelligence and conscious leadership. That's what we were really focused on with them. And it what happened is there started to be this shift among the team and it was more than just a shift in the organization. I remember the CEO saying like, wow, people's like lives are changing, their marriages are improving, like things are
Mm-hmm.
shifting. And so we started to bring that broader to the organization. And so we started just by doing some workshops, but then a couple of years later, we had every person that had the title or any kind of title of supervisor go through an elevating conscious leadership cohort.
Mm-hmm.
They got to do a little bit of individual coaching and they got to learn all of this in these groups of 6 to 12.
Mm-hmm.
And we did strategic planning.
Mm-hmm.
And we did strategic planning. I have a process called human touch strategy. And you can do it without doing all of this development, but it's so much better when you do some development before. And
Right. I believe
suddenly
that.
we were involving the whole organization from the bottom up in some of the strategic planning itself. And they had this similar language. They had this similar sentiment of, wow, let's look at this in a bigger way. And I'm not 100% sure the executive team would have agreed to that process without doing some of this work themselves.
Yeah.
So it came back around that we had a strategy. The goals might have the goals, the way they were worded, the executive team might have been able to come up with those exact same goals sitting in a room for 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
difference is that the organization felt like they had input into these and they understood what they meant and what their role was. And so we had better retention. We had less turnover going on. We had a much way less silos because they were able
Yeah.
to put a cross-functional dashboard together. And so it really started to shift the results and it started to move leadership and strategic skills throughout the entire organization. And so then you're not relying in a complex world of just 4 or 5 people at the top just we
Right.
still
Yeah.
need some of that, right, as a conductor, but then we've got people that are really understanding their roles and they can lead as well.
Yeah, they feel empowered and they have that sense of ownership, which is so critical. I love that. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing how it all fits together and how the starting point, the foundation is really valuable if you're trying to get to that point of strategic planning and why you should do both. This is great. And you've got, this episode is going to be airing in 2025. And I know you're focused on experiences and for the people that you support. You've got something coming up in the future, right? A retreat that you're looking to bring people who are waiting for that, or thinking about that next step and thinking about something else. Can you share a little bit about that now, or should we exit from this
Yeah,
part of the
absolutely.
conversation?
Yeah. So
Yeah. Okay.
The
Cool.
Sherpa Way,
Yes, the
Sherpa
Sherpa
Journeys
way.
in Nepal is a program that we are putting together in 2025. So, um, with Sherpa Mountain Adventures is our partner, which is a Sherpa-owned company. Sherpa are a group of people from Nepal, and
Yeah.
partner Jeff Clem and I are executive leadership coaches and strategists, and we've both been to Nepal and had transformational experiences. So we both kind of knew that, can you imagine starting like a well, so in August, we'll launch a program, a cohort, and start doing some work, and then we'll go over and utilize Nepal as the immersion.
Yeah.
Utilize the Himalayas, we'll utilize the culture of the Sherpas, which there's so much to learn from the Sherpas, so much to learn from the awe of the Himalayas. And then
Hmm.
we'll come back. And and so we go in October.
Yeah.
October, come back in November. We're gone door to door 18 days. And then we do some integration of like, wow, that was an amazing experience. And how is that going
And
to change
yeah.
the way I lead?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I'll include a link or at least they can find you on LinkedIn, especially to find out more information. But what a powerful opportunity to really dive into that self healing and leadership development work in a beautiful, amazing country and led by two highly experienced executive coaches and then the Sherpa team. That's amazing. Renata,
Yeah.
anything else that you would like to share or just impart people who are listening, watching with as it relates to the importance of becoming a more self-aware, conscious leader and how that can positively impact themselves and the people that they work with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, as we know, the world is not becoming less complex, it's becoming more complex. And there's a lot more unknowns, a lot more uncertainty. And therefore, getting through these times and wayfinding, the more we are grounded and shifting and expansive within us, the more
Mm,
we're able to weather through this. So I often will say certain policies, certain rules, certain things don't have to exist as much when we start to become more conscious, because it's like we move this stuff inside of us.
wow.
And then we're able to have much deeper relationships. And so when everything is going haywire around us, if we've got our relationships and we've got our core, that really helps us move forward. And that is the essence of becoming a more conscious human and a more conscious
Yeah.
leader.
Yeah. That sounds good to me.
Yeah, and it feels good, right? It feels
Yeah, it
better
feels
to,
good.
yeah, to live that way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Renelle, this was great. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights around conscious leadership. And I really appreciate your time that you've taken today. And I look forward to continuing to stay in touch with you. So thanks again for coming on the show.
So thank you, Jessica, and thanks for spreading the word about how important change is
Yes,
and getting through it.
absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.